Welcome to this week's episode of the Maza's Musings podcast. This week we are joined by Rick LeCouteur, who is a conservationist, an environmentalist, and he is now a children's author. He's added that to his resume. So we talk with Rick about his experiences as a professional and what led him now in retirement to this new chapter of his life, no pun intended, which is children's author. So before we get into that, though, we did have some additional responses to our question about what is scary Disney. And we're going to share those with you as part of this week's Maza's Mickey Minute. So let's get right into that.
Donald, wake up! It's showtime! Don't forget the orchestra.
Ah, there you are. And just in time.
Mom says there's even more magical stuff now.
For those of you standing, please hold on to the handrails throughout our journey and stay clear of the doors.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, cause this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
And here we go!
All right. Well, getting into some of those things that we were talking about, the scary Disney. Now, this was basically the premise of our last episode, which was all about what about Disney scares us. It could be movies, it could be characters, and we had a great discussion. We had some people who joined us via social media or by sending emails with some of their scary Disney memories or movies or characters. And after the episode was over, we had a few more people reach out and join in. So I thought I'd read some of those as well. So we had Eileen's aunt, Barbara, actually chimed in with a bit of a deep cut. I can't remember the last time I saw this movie, actually, but I do recall this from that movie. She said that the child catcher from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang was terrifying to her. So if you don't know what that is, I suggest looking it up. I'm sure that you could find it on YouTube or something with, the way internet is today. It should be pretty easy to find. So Matt Conway, who is a friend of the program, and hopefully we'll have him on soon to talk about some movie related stuff, as he's a movie critic. He kind of piggybacked on the Toy Story element that we talked about, and he pointed out the scene where Sid is burning a hole in Woody's forehead. And he said, especially with that 90s animation, he really found that terrifying. And certainly the 90s animation there, all of those kids looked like Gollum from Lord of the Rings. So he also threw out the "When Somebody Loves Me" thing. He's talked about that on a previous Disney movie podcast we did. But that's more emotional trauma than scary trauma, so I kind of disqualified that, but I'll still throw it in there, because obviously that's something that stuck with me, or stuck with him, if he's brought it up time and time again. The last one was we got something from Charles from the Conversations podcast, which is a great a great Star Wars podcast, but he also chimed in on this Disney topic, and he pointed out really what should have been an obvious one, which is the Headless Horseman chasing down Ichabod Crane, and certainly that is one of the timeless animated Halloween features, which was great because on top of everything else, it featured Bing Crosby. So yes, thank you to everybody who contributed to this, both before the episode came out and who responded after the episode. I loved all of the interaction here, and hopefully we'll be able to do more things like this in the future. Now, as scary as some of these Disney moments may be. Something that isn't scary is booking your next Disney vacation. And you know what would help with that? Working with We Do Travel Right. We Do Travel Right offers that concierge level service so that you can get back to just having fun on your vacation, especially with all these new scary things like Lightning Lane Premier Pass and things like that. They can help you navigate all of that. And the best part is all of their services are free. Whether you're looking at a Disney vacation, a Universal vacation, an all-inclusive resort, or a cruise, those companies build the price of an agent right into their prices. So you're paying for the use of an agent whether you use one or not. So it seems like a no-brainer that you'd want to use one and get that expert on your side. So if you're interested in a free, obligation-free quote, talk to We Do Travel Right today by going to wedotravelright.com/Maza. That's wedotravelright.com/MAZA and get your next magical vacation started today.
Now I can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand.
So long, partner.
See you real soon.
Well, I am here with Rick LeCouteur, who is a retired veterinarian, environmentalist, conservationist, and now children's author and conservation artist. I want to thank you, Rick, for joining us, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. As always, the introduction may be a lot more exciting than the actual experience, but I love that you called me an artist because I'm actually a digital artist. I take my own photographs and turn them into book illustrations. And to some people, that's cheating, except I can tell you it takes me a lot longer to do it that way than it would to start from scratch. But I'm happy to be here and looking forward to answering a few questions.
Well, as I said, among other things, you are a children's author and illustrator, and you have a new book that's coming out. Nasty Names Are Hurtful. An Australian White Ibis responds to name calling in the city. Before we get into that, I'd like to be able to introduce people to you a little bit more in your experiences. You have years worth of experiences that have spanned a couple continents. So I guess first, what really inspired you to choose the career path you did early in life?
I'll try to be brief, Chris, but I'm the son and grandson of educators. My predecessors were all teachers and headmasters and things like that. And growing up, I spent my time between the city of Sydney in Australia, and we had a family farm about 300 miles west of Sydney, where we grew sheep and cattle and grew wheat and grew alfalfa. And I always loved the outdoors. I loved the sheep and the cattle. Sort of ignored the Australian birds and mammals that were in our environment because my parents never told me that we were in this amazing environment of Australian native animals. So I took them for granted growing up and concentrated on my sheepdogs, numerous cats, and anything else that could be described as an animal. And this fascination was fueled by the early books I read, and my favorite children's book author of all time is an Englishman by the name of Gerald Durrell. And I highly recommend his books. He wrote My Family and Other Animals and a few books like that. And when I was in primary school, I won a book prize. I've only ever won 2 book prizes in my life. And this one was called The Wonderful World of Nature. And that book was all black and white, regular photographs, published in the 50s, and that was my inspiration. With all of that, it was a foregone conclusion that I would become a veterinarian. And I had a great career as a veterinarian. I loved it, doing everything from small animal practice to equine practice. I came to North America to learn more, and North America provided in spades. I'm so grateful to this country for giving me opportunities. I became a specialist veterinary neurologist and neurosurgeon. My research was in human brain tumors. I loved teaching, and you said I have a lot of experience. I just went to Australia a week ago and celebrated my 50th vet school reunion. So I'm an
Oh,
old fellow. But I wanted to say one thing about this, Chris. It's not the experiences, it's not the different countries, it's not anything other than the people and the animals that I've met along the way.
mm,
Those people and animals provided me with inspiration, and that's why I am where I am today. And I think as we all age, we look back and are absolutely impressed by the people who have made a difference in our lives. And so that's that's where I am with that. The environmental side came a lot later. I love the outdoors, and back
mhm.
in my day, growing up, there were no threats. My mother used to say, "Try to get home before dark," and we would just go unsupervised and do whatever it was we did. Um, in retirement, I retired in 75 from veterinary medicine, had to do something, so started a company with a colleague, Dr. Carol Walton, and that company is Veterinary Expeditions, and it takes people to all corners of the world specifically to see wildlife. So we go from Borneo to India to Africa to Antarctica to a lot of places around the world to see the animals. I became interested in photography through that because there are always some avid photographers on these trips, and I was
Sure.
supposed to be leading them, but they led me. And then I learned how to turn my photos into artworks and asked myself one question: what would be my generation's legacy when it comes to the environment? What would be we be leaving my grandchildren with regard to animals, environment, biodiversity? And of course, the answers came crashing down upon me. And I realized that we're not doing a very good job of preserving the world and its animals for your kids'
Right.
generations and my grandchildren's generations. So that's it, and that's me being brief, Chris. I'm sorry, but it's an important story because I think we all need to step in and think of the next generation. What are we going to leave them? You know, it's
Sure.
a big question, isn't it? I gave a lecture recently, and it was to a bunch of old people like me, and it was entitled, "Will your grandchildren ever see a lion in the wild?" And the answer is, if we continue on the course we've set for ourselves, they will not.
Mm,
20 years from now, they're not going to see a lion in the wild. And of course, the same plight exists for so many other species. I'm going to let you have a go now. It's your
sure.
podcast.
So I am obviously a father of a 6-year-old daughter, and my wife is also an educator. She teaches fifth grade. And so I certainly have an appreciation for instilling a lot of what you're talking about and making sure that children, especially, have an understanding of their impact on the world. So I guess with that in mind, we can look to your books. You've got a couple that you've published already, and another one that's coming out in November, in this month. This podcast is coming out November 1st. Um, what was that transition like for you? What inspired you to try to connect with youth through this medium?
I'm going to say what I should never say to somebody who's interviewing me, and that is, great question, Chris, because obviously you asked it, so it would be insulting to say that. But it's really a wonderful question because it gets to the heart of the matter. Um, basically, the book titles I've written are all about animals. The first one was an alphabet book, and I wrote it for my grandkids because I was reading to them at bedtime, and I was reading about penguins that were eating pizza, driving motor cars, going to school, and nowhere in the whole book was there any inkling of their actual environment. So I would call those whimsical or fantastical tales, and kids need those. That's where their sense of humor starts. But they also need a balance of realism and authentic information. And science has shown, research has shown that this is really important, and that kids that have the balance, and the parents determine what that balance might be, and the teachers at school, but if they have that balance, they develop a far greater sense of environment, biodiversity, and they become interested. There are some studies out of Europe which over 20 years, only the Scandinavian countries could do that sort of study, but they support what I'm saying. And so I was disappointed with what I was reading to my grandkids, and so I decided to start writing my own books. And I started with the easy one, which was an alphabet book, and then from then went on to a book about my favorite bird in the world, which is the red-billed oxpecker in Africa. It's a much maligned little bird that lives off the ticks that are found on the big mammals, and they have a great symbiotic relationship. And it brings the thought that friends can be very, very different in stature, in points of view of the world, but they can still be very close friends. Then I went on to write one about the flightless cormorant, which is one of the 40 cormorant species on the earth, and the only one that can't fly. It's found in the Galapagos. It doesn't need to fly because it just hops off the lava platform, and there are lots of eels and things for it to eat. So it got lazy, it stopped flying, and its wings became vestigial or less and less prominent, and it can't fly now. And then the third one was about penguins. And it's about 3 different species of penguins that meet as pen pals, and they are very keen to meet each other. But when they get together to meet, they think they're going to be the same because they're black and white birds that eat the same thing, swim in the same ocean, and they don't recognize one another because they're 3 different species. When they finally work out that they're all penguins, one of them says, "It's so disappointing. We can't be friends now. We're different." And they start to walk away from one another. And then one says, "Wait, we're already friends." They come together and walk away. And that's a great message for kids. And the current one about the Australian White Ibis is about a bird that's ubiquitous around the towns of Australia. It's a very tall bird, about 3 feet. It's a huge ibis with a big curved beak. And it's a magnificent bird to look at. It's just like the ancient ibis in Egypt that were found on hieroglyphs in tombs and things. The Egyptians worshipped the ibis. The early Australians who arrived after the ibis arrived were Aboriginal people. They worshipped the ibis. They preserved its wetlands. And then people that looked like you and me came to Australia, and they dried up the wetlands, turned it into farmland, and the ibis had nowhere to go. They became almost extinct. They were taken to a zoo where only a few of them remained. They escaped from the zoo and found that they could survive in city parks where they nested in palm trees that looked and felt, I'm anthropomorphizing a little bit, just like their native wetlands, and they've thrived. But people make fun of them and call them nasty names, hence the title of the book, Nasty Names Are Hurtful. They call them bin chickens. A bin in Australia is a trash can, so bin chickens, because they scavenge, because they've got no alternative. They are environmental refugees of the first order. And I was spurred on to write this book because I was watching an episode of Bluey, the animated cartoon, with my grandkids. And
I'm very familiar with Bluey.
Isn't it a great show? And
it is.
Grandkids
it's a lot of fun.
Laugh when Bluey chased an ibis and called it a bin chicken. I said, "Wait, you kids, this is a beautiful bird. Don't call it nasty names. appreciate it, find out how you can help it by reestablishing its natural home. It doesn't want to live in the city. It would far rather be out in its own wetlands with its big beak, diving for worms and beetles and things. And so that's why I wrote that book. And so there's a reason for all these books. They bring a moral story to the kids. In the case of the ibis, it's what the ibis does to handle the name calling, which is really good instruction for kids and a good moral for kids. There's a part of the book which is for the parents, and it tells them the ibis story so they can answer the kids' questions.
Sure.
And then there's a final page which tells the kids what they can do in a constructive way to make the ibis's life better. And so that's my history of books. I have more in the works, and I'm intending to write 10 books about wildlife, birds, native birds, and then follow that with 10 books about different mammals like hyenas and some of the ones that are maligned, but are in fact very, very important to the environment. So that's my brief description. This is so exciting for me, Chris. I can't tell you, when I read to a classroom of kids and they're all sitting cross-legged on the floor in front of me, and they hands go up and they ask questions, and I ask them questions. I say, why is using nasty names hurtful? And they have an answer to that, and they go away hopefully with the message that the environment is so important to their kids' future 50 years from now.
Sure.
I can't answer those questions briefly, Chris. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. And I think that one of the things that I find very unique about your books and the topics you're talking about is you are teaching kids about these creatures, these parts of our world and their environments, while also helping them navigate their own environments. And that's a unique kind of blending that I don't think you see a lot. As you were mentioning, you were reading a book about penguins eating pizza and things like that, so this is a blending of a couple of different things that I think helps connect with kids and also connect how they fit in with the world, both their own sphere and beyond.
Yeah, I hope you'll, my books are really designed for 7 to 10-year-olds who can really grasp all those concepts. And that's reading the book on their own. There are some pre-syllable words in there, and I'm told that you can't handle those until you're 7 or 8 years old. So I'm a great student of psychology and educational theory. But the younger kids I've found with my own, if they're sitting on a parent's lap and reading at bedtime or reading in a chair, and the parent is there to explain, they can be read by kids much younger than your 6-year-old. And I've even had people with 2 or 3-year-olds that tell me that they're good books for that age group. So, age groups for books are a very difficult thing. I was taught, I've lectured a lot around the world on the subject of veterinary medicine, and my writing was all about veterinary medicine and research before I started kids' books. But the one thing I knew from all of this was know your audience. You're well familiar with that. In other words, you don't want to write an adult's book for kids. You want to write a kid's book for kids. Challenge them, teach them, but have them enjoy it at the same time. And so that's my motivation, and that's where I hope to take this. As a former worker in the publishing industry, you will understand when I say these books are the most difficult thing I've ever done. I have developed with my research team treatments that are used to this day to treat brain tumors in not only dogs and cats, but in people. And I'm very proud of that. And that was my 50-year job, nothing I did in the sphere of research, teaching adult kids, 23 to 30-year-olds, has challenged me as much as trying to get my books out into the publishing industry. You know, I want to get these messages out there.
Yeah.
My motivation is to educate young readers, to have them have fun, not to the whimsical, fantastical extent, but to the valuable extent of understanding where they live, who they are living with, how to get on with one another, what can they do as they grow up in this world to make it a better place. And as you know from working in the publishing industry, it's a very difficult proposition.
It
The reason,
certainly is.
particularly because, I read a statistic the other day that said there are 250 to 300,000 new children's picture books published every year
Wow.
in the United States of America. How do I get my message out when I'm competing with a penguin that eats pizza? And so that's the big challenge. And that's why I'm so thrilled to be talking to you today, because you've got that background and I know you understand this. People write books. That's the easy part. My
Yeah.
goodness. The hard part is having people read your book, find your book. Nothing gives me greater pleasure than to go into a bookstore and see my book on the shelf. And then I'm wondering, why is it on the shelf?
Why is it still there?
Exactly. Why is it still there?
Well, one other thing that I noticed while I was, looking at some of your stuff is you also have a blog on your website. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how that differs from some of the other writing that you've done?
Oh, that's a very good question, Chris. Um, to answer that briefly is very difficult. A year ago, I didn't really know what a blog or a podcast was or were.
Sure.
I've learned this through the books. So as Aristotle said, teaching teaches us. And so by trying to teach, I've learned. And through teaching, so we learn. And
Hmm.
so I've become very familiar with what podcasts and blogs are. And I really commend you on your podcast. I thoroughly enjoy your sense of humor and the topics that you choose to discuss.
Well,
Um,
thank you.
Really fantastic and involving your family. It's just a friendly place to listen, in my opinion. And I support you 100%. And I've now enrolled for your blog because I love it.
Oh, thank you.
So good job and kudos to you. But getting back to my blog, which is called Rick's Blog, before I spoke to you today, I decided to Google Rick's blog. There are more Rick's blogs than you can possibly poke a stick at. And so the only way really to get there without searching through dozens of Rick's blogs is to go to my author website. And there are some other things on that website that are interesting, I think. But Rick's blog is found on there. And I hope you'll be able to give the link to my author website at the end of this. And on those blogs, I started writing them about 6 months ago, and I have become absolutely addicted to the process. I was driving outside today, driving to a local town, and there was a murmuration of starlings filling the sky just with their movements, and it was so beautiful. And I thought, how do they not run into one another? Because they don't. And then I learned, science, I came home and researched it, and I found that one starling picks up on the movements of the 7 closest starlings. How they found that out,
Wow.
I have no idea. Not the million starlings, just the closest 7. And that made sense to me. They don't run into one another because they've got this. It's like the new cars that have a camera on every corner.
Sure.
they're not trying to look at the mountains in the distance. They're looking at what's close. And so it works. And it's the most beautiful aspect of nature, as you know. But then I thought, why can't people learn from that? We're running into each other all the time. Why can't we learn about teamwork and cooperation and some of these other things that we seem to be having so much trouble with, Chris, these days? And probably always, but more these days than in the past. And I thought the starlings have it all over us. They're such team workers, and yet their brain is the size of your little fingernail. We have a huge brain with billions of neurons, and we can't learn to be kind to one another. So I've written a blog about that, and it'll be coming out in the next week. And I just love that I have an outlet for these thoughts. And to the 3 or 4 people who read my blog, I thank them very much, and I'm hoping it might be 5 or 6 by the end of this podcast, because it's a way to collect your own thoughts, share with like-minded people, because they're volunteering to read the blog. I can't make them.
Sure.
And so just like your podcast, you can't make people watch or listen to your podcasts.
Right.
But by doing the job you do, people want to listen and they learn from each one. So a blog is sort of like a verbal podcast, if you like. And I've come to thoroughly treasure it. As a matter of fact, I could blog every day for the next 10 years and still not have exhausted the topics. I heard someone use the term, I'm not going to speak politics, of course, but I heard the term fascist on TV last night, and I realized I don't know what that actually means. I think I do.
Sure.
But how do you know the difference between a fascist, a Marxist, a capitalist, a communist, etc.? So I researched it and I blogged on it today. And maybe 2 or 3 people will enjoy that information too. I think it's the motivation to teach, and through teaching, learning, that drives me. I think you have a little bit of that in you too, or a lot of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, well,
I'm exhausting, aren't I, Chris?
No, I love it. I think that that you just have such a wealth of your own knowledge and such a thirst for more, and not only a thirst to gain the knowledge for yourself, but then to make sure that you're sharing it. And I think that that is so refreshing, especially in the current climate that we're in right now. One of the reasons why I try to be as positive with my blog is to create a space where that negativity and those kinds of things that you're talking about, people as smart as we are, having difficulty, being simply kind to each other or working together or establishing the teamwork, So, I'm loving every minute of this conversation. That sigh was honestly one of, a little bit of, admiration and joy, because this has really been, really refreshing for me. So I'm going to ask, how can people first, we've talked about the blog. How can people connect with the blog, and how can they find more information about you and your work?
I think by just Googling on the internet my name, which is very difficult to spell. I wish I had a 4-letter name like you, but in fact, it comes from the French, although I'm Australian, as I said. But that would be the best place to find the blog. There are links to all the major retailers in there, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and so on. And my first 3 books that have been published, I haven't yet published the ones that I wrote just for my grandkids. I intend to, but there are links to the books and some other interesting, I hope interesting information. There's a media section that deals with a few of the things that have been written about me or that I have written. And and I'm going to, with your permission, add your blog to that list of media
That
things
would be great.
when after November the 1st when it comes out. And I hope we can continue our association because this has been wonderful. I would love to meet Eileen and your daughter one day. I was hoping Eileen, she seems to pop in on some of the Disney blogs and things, and I thought she might pop in and ask me a question from her perspective. I was hoping so because she adds an element to your podcast which I really enjoy, and
She
so
certainly does, and of course, she being a teacher, she also has a lot of correcting and things like that to do as well. So I love it when she's able to join me and fit it in. But and I would love to reconnect again. And I think that, especially. I think that Megan is one who also really enjoys, she loves reading, she loves animals. So I think that these are things that are really going to connect with her as well. So I'd love to reconnect again,
yeah, I'd love to come back
with
and
including them.
read one of my books for you and for her, and we can have a little Q&A at the end and ask her what she thought about it. Live would be very risky for me, but would be an honest assessment.
That would certainly be interesting. So you've mentioned that you are working on other books. Anything you'd like to add about any future plans or your vision for what you'd like to do with these moving forward?
Nothing beyond what I think I've already said, at the risk of boring everybody a little bit, but I hope that I can get the word about wildlife conservation, biodiversity, and the future of our planet
Sure.
out there because I think our hope is the next generation. I don't think yours and my generations aren't going to do it. We've proven that. Our track record is supportive of the fact that things are continuing to deteriorate. And so I think it's up to your daughter's generation to do this, to carry the torch, and if we've left them anything to carry. And so the more we can educate them about wildlife and the environment, the more likely that is to happen. So that's my mission. That's my only mission. At my age, I'm most interested in taking care of those that follow. And this is my contribution to that effort. So please, by all means, any of your listeners, go to ricklecouteur.com and you can help them spell that. It's spelled
Yes.
the
I'll
French
I'll
way.
link I'll include a link with the show notes for this so people will be able to click directly to it. So
And if anybody has any questions or want to get in touch with me directly to discuss anything, I have a contact at the end of that, the end of the website, and I'm very happy to hear from people and to communicate not about their own pet's health, because I have had a rule for many years that I will not prescribe for a pet that I have not personally examined.
right.
However, anything to do with this podcast and the books, I'm very happy to enter into a conversation. Anything that spreads the word, Chris.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining me. This was a joy. It truly was. I really enjoyed talking with you, and hopefully this helps spread the message of your books so those books can help spread the message that you're trying to get out there.
Thank you, Chris. It's been an absolute pleasure to meet and chat with you, and I hope we'll have other opportunities. But thank you very, very much indeed.
All right. Well, thank you. I again, this was great. I very much appreciate it. Well, thank you to everybody who listened to this week's edition of the Maza's Musings podcast. I thought that was a tremendous conversation that I had with Rick, and thank you to Rick for being a part of this. I really, really, really enjoyed his message and just the great spirit that he had about him. I want to thank everybody who also has participated in the Scary Disney segments, and I really want that to be more of an element of what we do with this podcast. Is I really want people to feel like they are part of the podcast. So if you have thoughts, if you have things that you would like to share, you can hit us up on our social media. It's the Maza's Musings Podcast Facebook page. We also have Twitter, Maza's Musings Pod. We're also on Instagram and Threads, also Maza's Musings Pod. We're fooling around with some TikTok as well. It's Maza's Musings Podcast. And there are all these different ways that you can get in contact with us. You can also go directly to our website, mazasmusings.wordpress.com, where you can find more information on the podcast, listen to past episodes, find out what podcatchers we are streamed through, or there's also information on how to connect to our newsletter or how to send us an email. You can also send us an email directly at mazasmusings@gmail.com. Once again, thank you everybody for listening to this podcast. I would love to connect with you. So if you have anything that you'd like to say, if you have any ideas on collaborations, if you have any ideas on things that you would like to talk about or would like to hear me talk about, I'd love to hear it all. Really, I am just looking to create a platform that everybody can have some fun. So join in me with the fun, and we'll just bring a little bit of light to what can sometimes be a dark world. Anyway, happy Halloween, everybody. I hope you had a great time. I hope you have a great weekend and a great week.